What an absolute travesty. I mean, who the hell is running Glastonbury? I mean, it was so ridiculous, wasn't it? People are calling for the Eavis family to be sort of strung up. People are calling for Tim Davie to be sacked and for him to quit. You know, there's something very, very wrong with the BBC, and there's something very, very wrong at Glastonbury, it seems to me.
Absolutely right, and I think, look, multiple checks could have been carried out. They should have been carried out. Everybody knows the sensitivities of what's going on, particularly in the Middle East, and the kind of artists that you get at Glastonbury, the kind of
They
supporters.
knew exactly who they'd hired, didn't they?
They know exactly who.
This Bob Villain character, who turns out not to be quite as perhaps working class and thuggish as he's making out. He seems to have a double-barrelled name, and he seems to own a couple of companies, and of which he's the director at Companies House.
Exactly, which is testament to the tantamount to the people that go to Glastonbury. It's a £400 plus ticket. I think.
Of course.
These aren't sort of people that are there just for a good time, that might be supporting particular causes.
Right.
These are middle class lefty loonies.
Pascal Robinson Foster, I think his real name is,
very nice.
Very nice. He's got a couple of companies for Companies House. One of them it's called Ghost Theatre Limited, of which he's a director, appointed 20th December 2023, and Lavie Hill Limited, of which he's also a director, also set up in July 2023. He's doing all right, this guy. He's making quite a lot of money on the side of his hate-filled speech.
Exactly, and this will be a publicity stunt, no end, where I think he probably just wants to be the... I mean, I don't think maybe it's quite a right comparison, but, the left, loony version of maybe the Tommy Robinson on the right. I don't know whether he wants a particular following, a cult following, whether he just wanted to make a name for himself. But
well, what's interesting is Katie Hines writing in the Mail today about how Kneecap, who he was supporting, who are the other sort of band that are now in all sorts of trouble with the police for all sorts of things, he was the support act for them, and they had put out a thing on their Instagram at the weekend to say, you'll have to turn up very, very early if you want to see us this weekend. And so everybody kind of thronged to this spot where this guy was on. Let's have a look at his actual performance.
Death, death to the IDF! 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 Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be free.
I mean, it's quite amazing that the BBC not only carried that, but didn't cut it off at any point when you've got people, and you've also, there's about 30,000 people there. They weren't all chanting, but an awful lot of them. And Katie Hine describes it as a really scary scene. She's been to Glastonbury many times. I know Katie. She's a great reporter, great showbiz editor and all the rest of it. She was like, I've never felt so intimidated in my life with all these Palestinian, there's so many Palestinian flags, like somebody was giving them away.
Well, I mean, the two things. I mean, the one is slightly trivial, because I know the BBC is a big organisation, and this is not a defence of the BBC, but if I was Tim Davie, I would be absolutely up in arms. He should be too.
He should.
Because there are different elements of the BBC, just like BBC online service, so the people that actually type up the stories that go onto the BBC website have a particularly leaning, I should imagine, than the actual broadcasters themselves. And so, there is a problem within the BBC, no doubt about that, as this has showed, because, of course, as you say, it shouldn't have been broadcast, it shouldn't have been aired, it should have had the plug should have been pulled out.
Well, because they'd already said they weren't going to live broadcast Kneecap, so they obviously clearly were aware of the fact that that could be controversial. But what they didn't do was check this guy out, because if they checked him out, they would have known that he's been doing this stuff for years.
Exactly. And Rob Jemrick has given a couple of comments to the papers where he says that actually this guy's appeared on the BBC since 2007.
Yeah.
They've used him before, and they know the kind of thing that he's talked about, such as dig up Maggie in reference to Margaret Thatcher.
That's also fine, though, for them. The BBC don't have a problem with that.
They won't have a problem. No, and that's the problem. So, heads have got to roll at this. And it won't be lost on anyone, the irony of, this guy chanting, as you just saw there, from the river to the sea, a complete and utter a disgraceful thing, calling for basically the extermination of the Israeli state.
And also people say, oh, but it's all right because he was only calling for the death of the soldiers. It's like, well, actually, if you understand anything about the way the IDF actually recruits its members, the IDF is made up of citizens of Israel who all do national service. So actually, you're calling for the death of Israelis. That's what you're doing.
And there'll be the same people that don't understand it, because they're the ones that go out to say it was just being expressive. He was an artist, sharing a view that millions of people, absolutely not.
He'll have a show on Channel 4 soon, no
well,
doubt, won't he?
Exactly. But the idea that...
See, they're showing that... they've decided they're going to show the BBC documentary about Gaza.
Yes.
Which apparently the BBC have decided they're not showing anymore because it wasn't put together properly. So that's fine for Channel 4, though. No problem at all.
Yeah, I think, again, something, needs to be... that needs to be said to Channel 4 about that. I think the heads need to sort of be banged together. But it wouldn't be lost on anybody that this guy was chanting that vile rhetoric, more than rhetoric, hate speech.
Well, worse than that, the people were chanting it along with him.
Exactly.
All these sort of
getting swept up
Wallies
in the...
from West London, Chiswick,
but it was
Barnes, and they go, oh yeah, death to the IDF, super. What's wrong with you?
Well,
you're taking too much acid, you complete plonkers.
But it was happening at a music festival.
Yeah.
A music festival where on the 7th of October in 23... Exactly.
This was the tweet that I put out, actually, which has now received something like 2.1 million views, and I did it on the Saturday night. But it was absolutely incredible because, basically, I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. I couldn't quite believe that people were actually joining in. This is my tweet. This is quite simply discussing a music festival audience urging the deaths of Israelis who were literally slaughtered at a music festival.
Yep.
Glastonbury ought to be ashamed of themselves. And many people, not just people who were supporters of Israel, came out and said what they should have had at Glastonbury was maybe a minute's silence for the victims of the Nova Festival, which was actually a music festival that people went to and was brutally slaughtered by the people that they're lionising.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It totally. And, that's why it's still in all the papers today. That's why I think, there's still lots of questions. It'll run and run.
Again, the BBC, as you say, have got it completely wrong.
Yep.
They had multiple opportunities to sort it out, and the Eavis family have come out and said how horrified they are. These are the people that own the Glastonbury event, basically. The father has handed it to the daughter. But they should have seen this coming, you know. Because it's just prior, he did an interview with The Guardian just prior to Glastonbury starting, saying, people know what this event is about. If they don't like our politics, they can buzz off, basically, and go somewhere else. So, they know what they're doing, but they've let it get out of hand. Police are apparently now assessing these comments made by Bob Villan and Kneecap. This is the Somerset police, I think, who need to be slightly woken up from their torpor. Are they reviewing it? Is that the word?
They are, reviewing the footage.
Reviewing the footage.
Avon and Somerset.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that takes.
So when you see people chanting death, death to the IDF, how much reviewing do you have to do before you decide whether or not that's hate speech?
Yep. Well,
because, of course, the Telegraph's version of it this morning is saying, it's from Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, saying basically that Bobby Villan, Pascal Robinson Foster, should be treated in the same way as Lucy Connolly, in which case, presumably, inciting violence gets you, 31 months in prison?
Quite right.
Without any visitation from anybody and without any ability to go home and see your family.
Yeah, I think that's...
Otherwise, surely we've got two-tier justice, haven't we?
Exactly. And look, when it's been a bad year for the PM already, which I'm sure we'll come on to...
We will come on to that.
Which hasn't been lost
all week.
Which wouldn't be lost on anybody. The one thing that if I was the PM or if I was the Home Secretary today, the last thing... I know you shouldn't be governed by sound bites, but two-tier Keir has resonated.
Yeah, but he is, though.
Because there are so many examples of it.
Yeah.
And this is the latest national scandal. So if this guy is not arrested, if he is not dragged through the courts as quickly as Lucy Connolly was, and all the other protesters that took part in
Lucy Connolly's feet never hit the ground. She was taken into custody, and even before she was charged, she was in custody until the moment she was charged, and after she was charged, she was still in custody. Yeah. She's never been released ever since she was arrested.
And this is a mother who was in her own home, that was surrounded by, in close proximity to the terrible atrocities that took place in Southport, that was just sounding off, mistake, and
a tweet that wasn't seen by that many people.
A tweet wasn't, that was taken down immediately. This
this has been
calculated.
Seen. How many people have seen this, right? There was 30,000 people live at the thing, but millions of people around the world would have been watching Glastonbury, weren't they?
And this was premeditated. It was calculated. It wasn't just an off-the-cuff tweet where you're worried about obviously the death of three young girls in your own neighbourhood.
Yeah, he didn't come back after doing death to the IDF and then say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say that."
Yes.
That was obviously out of character, and I shouldn't have done that.
No,
that's his business.
No.
Let's have a look at this, though. This will really shock you. This was Kneecap's Glastonbury intro, which has a montage of things which I think you might recognise.
We have seen great progress since we gathered here a year ago.
Kneecap.
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 Kneecap is pretty disgusting.
A band I've never even heard of.
They'll never make anything of their lives.
A little bit of breaking news to bring you, and that is that counter-terrorism police will investigate rap trio Kneecap.
Yesterday, I wrote to Glastonbury Festival urging them to remove this
despicable evil which Kneecap represents.
Yeah. So Kevin O'Sullivan and Peter Cardwell make it onto Kneecap's hate-filled intro to their show. So, I mean, I wonder if we should be asking questions about these two as well, to be honest, because associations sometimes must be investigated.
Well, yes. You know, you can always judge people by the company that they keep.
I would
sometimes,
say,
can't
yeah,
you?
exactly right.
But maybe Kneecap just want to associate themselves with this. Well, maybe they want to come on. I don't know.
Maybe they do, but they haven't put me on their thing, and they could have done. So maybe I don't know what the reason is for that, but we shall see. But you know, I mean, seriously, I mean. The whole problem with this country was kind of encapsulated in a nutshell by Glastonbury, because I mean, of course, Kneecap then, I think as part of their act, said that everybody should boycott Rod Stewart, because Rod Stewart had come out just a few days before Glastonbury to say he actually thinks Nigel Farage's quite a good guy and thinks reform's quite a good idea. Yeah. And of course, so everyone expected the lefties to all boo, but of course they all went nuts for Rod Stewart, and funnily enough, and I wonder whether Glastonbury actually deliberately removed all vestiges of Palestinian flags. There was not one Palestinian flag to be seen when Rod Stewart played his sort of vintage set, and it was brilliant. It went down really well. Everybody loved it. Everybody said, you know, it takes an 80-year-old guy to actually do the best set at Glastonbury, and everybody was really enthralled. And that's what it should be about. You know, it shouldn't be about these ludicrous little, you know, sort of angry little irritants who haven't really got much of an audience, but suddenly are given one by Glastonbury because of events.
I think that's right, and I think, look, hopefully, I mean, I don't know how many people actually attend Glastonbury year on year, but I'd like to think that...
I think it's about 250,000, 300,000,
so,
something like that. It's quite a lot.
Amazing. So you'd hope that, because there were thousands of people obviously watching Rod Stewart, and hopefully that those thousands of people are the overwhelming... You hope. I mean,
you would hope.
Yeah,
I think they are.
But they're the overwhelming majority of people that are just there for the music. Yeah. They're not there to have make political statements.
The trouble is, though...
They're not there to get swept up in all of that Kneecap, Bob Dylan villain nonsense.
Right, but the trouble is so many of them are kind of blinded by what they are told, and by the fact that, you know... In fact, let me show you this. This might really get you going. This is Wes Streeting, who was appearing yesterday doing the morning rounds for various reasons, talking about a great many things, including the welfare bill, which of course is also now being accused of being two-tier. They've managed to create a two-tier welfare bill. But he, I think, was pretty outrageous here, and I think this will come back to haunt him. He was asked about Glastonbury, and here's what he had to say.
I do think that, like, if I take the equivalent of the war in Ukraine, I'm unequivocal about which side of that war I'm on. I want Ukraine to win. Would I be celebrating or chanting for the death of Russian soldiers? No. I want to see an end to the war, and I want to see an end to the conflict. I'd also say to the Israeli embassy, get your own house in order in terms of the conduct of your own citizens and the settlers in the West Bank. So, you know, I think there's a serious point there by the Israeli embassy I take seriously. I wish they'd take the violence of their own citizens towards Palestinians more seriously.
So he takes the opportunity to, instead of going after Glastonbury, instead of saying that it's wrong and that this guy should be locked up for hate speech, he decides to have a go at the Israeli embassy. You know, on the weekend when everybody's talking about Hamas murdering people at a music festival. I mean, it's a bit of an odd way to take that question, isn't it?
Totally. And this is what I'm afraid to say, as time goes on, you discover more and more, this is what the left do. There is no equivalence, I don't think, by the way, between what's going on in Ukraine, and so I thought that was... it's all just
bizarre things to say, isn't it? Yeah.
Deflection. But to try and deflect from the story of trying to talk about this Bob villain, whatever his name is, Pascal, whatever it is.
Pascal Robinson.
You know, chanting those vile things that he did, to try and then pivot to say, well, actually, I'd rather Israel get its own house in order before getting into the conversation, is ridiculous. You are a government minister. You are sitting around the cabinet table. And you've got to be able to answer the question of what has the BBC just broadcast that is going to incite hatred amongst the many of the Jewish people that live in this country? You know, answer that question.
Answer that question,
So to deflect, I mean, the only thing that I would personally say, speaking of music festivals and knowing, obviously, what happened in Israel, is that I think Israel, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Israel came second in the Eurovision Song Contest, which is voted by
the public.
Europeans and the public. And that shows maybe whose side they might be on when you have a country, an independent state, that has suffered a terrorist attack at the hands of terrorists, Hamas, and should be wiped out, and rightly so. Now, of course, there's a question about the proportion of force that Israel have used, but that's for
Well, it's a bit like somebody coming out after the Bataclan and saying, well, maybe what we should be doing is making sure that people in Syria aren't so upset that they want to come and murder people in a Paris, nightclub. But, that would have been wrong. So nobody actually said that then. But now we've got a Labour government where you think to yourself, well, if Wes Streeting was in that crowd, would he have been chanting death, death to the IVF?
Yeah.
Well, the IDF even.
Yes.
The IVF something else, obviously. That was the abortion bill a couple of weeks back.